Check, check. All right, sick. Sweet, we're here. Super excited to jam on a motion that is very near and dear to my heart. I think I have some version of this debate 5 times a week. And so we have some gigas, as was rightly put, on stage to reason about some of this stuff with us. We've got Matt, head of research at Pantera, and Abhay from Helium. And so we're going to get right into it. We don't have a ton of time. So I'll lay some broad structure and some ground rules. I've been told that I can do whatever I want here. So let me lay it down a little bit. I have this gong. Anytime there's a banger, I'm going to hit the gong.
Yeah.
Please optimize for bangers.
Some more bangers.
Most debates, crosstalk is not recommended. I highly encourage crosstalk for this debate. So take your time, but be civil if you can. And so run of show, I think we start with opening statements, as all good debates must. And then we'll kind of get into the specifics, the operative words here, which are hype and capital inefficiency. And then towards the end, we'll try and get into some meta questions about what we're all doing here, right? So maybe we'll start with opening statements. Matt, as you're defending the motion, we'll start with you, and then we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, everybody. I am your resident DEPIN skeptic here on the left end of the left curve, so thank you all. I'm research partner at Pantera. We have DEPIN investments. My life is better. If DEPIN works, I will be working with our portfolio companies to make it work. So I'm in good faith here, but I'm here representing 2019 me. So I was a PhD economist, and I came up in the trenches working in tokenomics for IoT, early wave DEPIN sort of projects, and I ran into some problems, and the problem was you would often find these things that had some questionable designs, and then you'd sort of have a big Rube Goldberg thing built around it, and you'd have to talk to the one person in the organization who understood that because they made it, and it had grown too complicated for anybody to criticize it anymore because only one person understood it, and I'd have to sort of talk them down and find the game theory model it was, and so that's why I'm wearing my token engineering shirt here. Is that's where I'm coming from, and I would say the reason DEPIN IoT projects are especially susceptible to this sort of Rube Goldberg buildup is that usually under capitalism, you will find that the capital hires labor, right? And the exception to that, when labor hires capital, which is what DEPIN's kind of trying to do, right? Your decentralized ownership, is when monitoring costs are really low or when capital costs are really low. Actually, I should say monitoring and capital costs. So think of like a law firm, right? A law firm, everybody's a lawyer. You can kind of see what each others are doing, right? Because you're all lawyers. Each person's billing by the hour, so there's a sort of market metering of what each person's doing. You're not trying to like figure out the complementarities of the skill sets. And so you can be a partnership. Also, what do you have to buy? Paper and a pen, right? A computer, pretty easy, right? Unfortunately, I think DEPIN fails on these 2 counts. Generally speaking, monitoring costs are high, right? DEPIN, by its definition, is a big Oracle problem with a token incentive putting pressure on this already fragile Oracle problem, right? And then 2, capital costs, which I don't know how I'm doing on time. Might have to talk about it next question. But I think capital costs, it varies, right? Some projects can be a little better and a little worse on this, but my fear with DEPIN is that the overall long-term capital trajectory is still pretty high capital. So I think there are challenges. I think they can be worked through on a case-by-case, kind of like case law basis. But in general, I'm pretty skeptical of DEPIN as the name of a category. To me, it seems like naming a problem, not a solution. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
All right. Well, yeah. So, the thing that I was thinking about a lot with this topic is that I think Matt and I actually truly agree on a majority of things, except I totally disagree with you here. So that's what we're supposed to do, right? So I'm going to start with set the tone with a couple of broad statements. I think crypto in general is not a human scale industry. We have not built the thing for every single human on the planet yet. I can tell you a couple of reasons for that, but I'd rather you just give me your 12 seed words like every other rug site out there, and maybe that's the faster way to do it. And I think that human needs really when you're building something that's human scale, you need to solve something for human needs, and I think it's pretty well represented in Maslow's hierarchy. At the base layer, you want to have sort of physiological things taken care of, food, clothing. I would add connectivity, water, and power to those things, because these are our basic human needs on the physiological sense. Then you need things like safety, shelter, and I actually think crypto does do something here as well, specifically around financial security. It's not just job security, right? So there's an opportunity there as well. And then you have things like love, belonging. That's where maybe things like SocialFi come into play. Esteem, crypto Twitter, like obviously. Self-actualization, I don't know, whatever Vitalik's on right now with that song. Like that's probably it. So, I think crypto has the opportunity to really solve for Maslow's hierarchy. For me, I think DEPIN is really the only real point of all this infrastructure we're building in crypto. So just with that base argument, I think that of course, we need this capital in here. We need this hype in here because ultimately crypto is for DEPIN, not the other way around.
All right, some bangers in there. All right, so let's start with the operative words here, right? Well, let's do capital efficiency first, and then we'll talk about hype.
Sure.
Up here, billions spent.
Yeah.
Only millions in revenue. What's the gap? How do we make this happen?
Are you talking as a investor right now?
No. I'm talking as a general macro observer. The point stands, right? Like tokens are an expense.
Sure.
We're building out all this infrastructure. The demand side seems to be picking up.
Yep.
And the ramp is there. I think some people are more optimistic, some people are less. So tell us a little bit about what gets us there and
I guess I'll make a lot of arguments in the connectivity space. It's the thing that I spent most of my time on. I'm sure that we can make similar arguments in other spaces like energy or maybe even water someday, hopefully. I think that one way that I look at this is that US ISPs have basically spent almost $2 trillion between the 90s and 2020. Roughly. It's self-reported, so you got to take that with a grain of salt, but that's roughly how much they've spent, right? And in the last several years, you're seeing anywhere between 60 to 80 billion dollars being spent every year, which is insane, right? What have we actually got? And I'm just thinking about this in the US, again, we're in Singapore, so maybe it's not the best argument, but that's how much money has gone into building connectivity infrastructure. And this is a core, again, it's core to what we need as a humanity. Traditionally you think about this, governments are the ones that are making a lot of these investments as well, and you have things like the FCC spending, anywhere between $5 to $10 billion over the last 10 years. You have the FCC, you have the USDA trying to get all farmers connected. You're trying to get all these places connected, but ultimately, there's still almost 5% of the US population that's uncovered by broadband. That's nuts, right? And you have the IRA that was recently passed in 2021, and I forget exactly how much they put in there, but it was on the order of 50 to 70 billion dollars just for broadband, when they were really focused on something like putting fiber into every single home. And fiber is insanely expensive. Tens of thousands of dollars just to serve an urban environment per mile. And then if you're thinking about a rural environment, you're talking $50,000+ just per mile to get one farm broadband connectivity. If we're going to talk about capital and efficiency, let's talk about that first. I think fundamentally, DEPIN is another way of building this kind of infrastructure. It's complementary to what's being done out there, and it seems to be a lot more capital efficient so far, but we haven't seen the end yet, and that's why it's worth investing in it right now.
Matt, care to take the other side?
Yeah, so I'm with you from an empirical standpoint. It's too early to tell, right? We're in venture, it's a time-honored tradition to chase a network effect until it hits an inflection point. It doesn't look like you've gotten as much as you've spent so far. I think that's totally fine. I think conceptually, I'm a little more concerned capital-wise because of the way a lot of these are structured. I'm not talking about helium here, obviously. I think just in general, more of a DEPIN thing. The issue, right, is that the actual value that accrues to the network is usually not the network itself, meaning that it's not what the people who are buying the devices are usually getting, right? And I think the reason for this is most of these industries are kind of dynamic, right? They require what we call dynamic capabilities, where some new tech is going to come and you're going to have to upgrade to 5G or something like that, right? And so you're going to have to coordinate this mass of people who, look, it's already hard in a blockchain space to convince people to accept a free network upgrade, right? If you're a validator, to make them pay for new hardware is its own new challenge, right? And somebody's coordinating that, and then maybe more importantly, the structure of these things, where you're having to design network incentives that are constantly fighting against spoofers or hackers or spammers, which people do really well, that's a specialty, that's a dynamic capability that is going to remain within the organization. And that's going to be a hard thing to decentralize. And so that's sort of like in the economic sense, the capital, I think that accrues in the business is one that's going to be hard to decentralize unless you become a DAO, right? And I think that winds up being the kind of like long-term vision for DEPIN is that the D is going to have to stand for DAO at the end of the day, right? And that the economic capital in it is going to the only way you can decentralize it is if you decentralize something that can then manage these dynamic capabilities, especially, right, the upgrading capability, generating new hardware, convincing people to get it, et cetera, and then defending the Oracle being the two big ones.
But isn't one of the problems that that DEPINs are trying to solve, and one of the sort of some of the more successful DEPINs are effectively telling people, hey, you're going to be deploying this thing for yourself anyway. You're maybe deploying this thing for your neighbors anyway. So, I don't completely agree with that upgrade problem argument, because I think that, if you have a coffee shop and you want to provide connectivity to your customers, and maybe also provide connectivity to your neighbors, you're going to do that anyway, and you're going to, run really great fiber to the site. You're going to put up a Wi-Fi router. Why not also support Helium Mobile at that point?
With you 100% on that. So Helium does latent capabilities then?
Sorry?
It does like latent things, like if you have spare compute, if you have a spare device. I do think that's the better approach.
Yeah, and I think that is the end goal of all DEPINs, is to align existing latent supply. It's not necessarily, sure, greenfield deployments are really, really important, but ultimately, that's what it's for, and the best DEPIN should be doing that.
Yeah. You know a thing or two about spoofing, right?
Of course. Of course.
Well, I guess to that point, right, Helium is one of the OGs, but arguably the first in this
Please
form of
get my
capital
cane off
formation.
so that I can get off stage,
I was telling someone the other day, if you compare the DEPIN market map from 12 months ago to the one that exists today, the one today is about 10 times as big, with 10 times as many names. Abhay, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that, one, I love experimentation. I've been in startups since God knows how long. I am also just as old. And, I think that, if you're thinking about hype, if that's, kind of where we're headed, it is important for the market to support a lot of experiments at the same time, so we can finally kind of resolve to some let's say true price or true value, sort of output. And I think about I spent some time in the food delivery space and the ride hailing space a little bit, and that was another one of these examples, right? We had at least in the U.S., but also I guess there's some great companies here too. You had DoorDash, Caviar, Postmates, Uber Eats. Here you have Grab. I've been using Grab the entire week, and it's been awesome. My God, it's better than Uber. Sorry, Uber. But it's been really great. And they raised so much money. A former company of mine acquired one of these. That's where I spent my time on this. And they raised $30 billion, and maybe there's $100 billion of market value right now, right? And I think this is what happens with some of these cycles. It is necessary for there to be experimentation. Different companies are going to take different approaches. DoorDash started in sort of suburban environments, whereas Caviar and Postmates started in urban environments, and we have seen how that resolves to. DoorDash, at least in the US, is the winner. Grab appears to be the winner here. You'll get winners, and you'll get a couple of other entrants that are sort of support them on the side. So I think this is the nature of experimentation. It's the nature of investment. And we should see more of these kinds of things.
Matt, what's the case that there's too many of these things?
The case for what?
The case that there's too many DEPINs, that there's too much going on, there's too much hype around this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the overhype thing is like I said in the beginning, I think it's naming a problem, not a solution. And so just generally speaking, calling it that, it's hard for me to get too excited about it. As a meme, I think it's kind of cursed. And so to go back to what Abby and I were saying earlier, right? The reason we were talking about latent hardware versus, devices that people already own versus having to acquire them, is that's going back to that second point I mentioned at the beginning, where I said that these things tend to work only if monitoring costs are low and capital costs are low. One way to make capital costs low is to make them zero, because people already have the capital, right? So I do think within the spectrum of DEPIN, stuff that is making capital costs low by focusing on latent infrastructure that people already have, that's something that we look favorably on, and I look favorably on as a researcher for sure. But generally speaking, right, like you still do have this other piece, which is the monitoring piece. And I think the monitoring piece, we have no general solution for it, right? The solutions are case by case. These are Oracle problems, and then most of the time we're making them worse with these token incentives. And so you will see DEPIN projects which have clever solutions. They add frictions in some important or interesting way, and that is cool, right? But generally speaking, as a category, there's just no answer to that question, right? It's each case. And for that reason, I think DEPIN as a category is a cursed category, even though there are some good projects within it.
I disagree, but that was a banger.
That was a banger. That's a banger.
Yeah. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. I think it's worth doing definitions for a bit. I've had Bitcoin described to me as a DEPIN. I've had Visa described to me as a DEPIN.
Yeah.
Let's talk like table stakes a little bit. What does the word mean to you guys? So we can like start defining the category a little bit more. Maybe Matt, you want to take this one to start?
Sure. Well, look, the Bitcoin thing I think is interesting. I actually use that as a question to hire researchers. Why does Bitcoin use useless work, right? I think one of the first things when you open up your little what is a blockchain explainer and you read, oh, Bitcoin's wasting all this energy on these puzzles that don't do anything. You're like, well, what if we made that useful, right? Why don't we do that? Proof of useful work is one of the first things you think about when you learn about, the way we architect consensus. DEPIN is trying to do something like proof of useful work, and it's an interesting question to figure out why that's not a good idea, or why that's a difficult idea, or why, say, Satoshi didn't do it. And look, I said this is a question to hire researchers, but I'll give you, my take on it is, literally when you say useful, what you're trying to do is you're trying to introduce an externality, something that the protocol can't see. Right? That's the Oracle problem that you're introducing literally there, right? The reason you do useless work is because you don't have that. If you do useful work, now you just have a thing that you don't understand at the protocol level, right? And so you have to have somebody sort of telling you about it, right? So I think that winds up being the definitional reason why it's different. So DEPIN, for that reason, I said the D should be a DAO, and I think the physical infrastructure network to combat this Oracle problem, right? I mean, it's ultimately just case by case, right? Ultimately, these things just are whatever people are telling it it is in the real world as it lives on the blockchain. That's the PIN part. And so I think it does resolve to just being a DAO if it's going to be decentralized. And so my movement would be to say, physical infrastructure network, yeah, it's if you can solve the Oracle problem. Decentralized, yeah, if you can make it a DAO. These things are DAOs.
Okay. Would you say solving the Oracle problem is a skill issue? Would you say that that's just a thing that we can resolve?
I mean, I think it is a skill issue on a long enough time scale, is maybe the best way that I think about it. I think like all of these networks are trying to, actually to Matt's point earlier, trying to take some latent supply and apply it to a new problem.
Well, not all of them, but yes, a lot of them.
Or sorry, the good ones.
Yeah, the good ones.
The good ones maybe. But like, yeah, that is one of the things we're trying to solve. And in DEPIN specifically, we're trying to take like off-the-shelf hardware and, say that it's a secure device, and try to build a root of trust around that, and then eventually turn it like solve the Oracle problem through that root of trust. There are other DEPINs out there that are trying to solve that by putting like a ECC chip down in the sensor level, and maybe that solves the problem. But show me a secure piece of hardware and give me a little bit of time, and I can show you how to break it. So of course it is a skill issue. It's also and it's going to be sort of this constant battle to try to figure out how to solve this problem. And I think it only really works if you sort of economically align it as well, right? Ultimately, like if you're economically aligned to Sybil something, you're probably going to do that first, right? It's or at least some edge of your user base is going to do that. And I don't think this is necessarily a DEPIN problem. I think that's just a human scale problem. But back to my earlier point, I think that's what we should be building.
Makes sense. All right, we have about 90 seconds left. I think, just to wrap things up, Matt, Abhay, you've taken different sides on this, right? I think looking forward, the question is, maybe Matt, what would you want to fund that's adjacent or relevant or similar? Like, what are you excited about if not for DEPINs? What does the application layer, what does the sort of layer of new set of economic coordination problems, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And if not for DEPIN, how would you categorize it? What would you call it? Yeah. And for you, Abhay, what do you want to see get built in this space going forward? What problems need to be solved? What categories? How do you want to, continue evangelizing this movement? We'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, so just quickly, I would say I really love the ambition and energy of DEPIN projects. I mean, that's consistently the most exciting thing about them. So it's always very interesting to look and figure out if they do have these other things buttoned up, because it's very cool to try and solve these real world issues. And look, I mean, the ambition of these things is fantastic. Aside from that, I'm really bullish in general. I think you asked this, right? I mean, I think stablecoins and crypto AI and all kinds of other exciting things going on in the blockchain space. So of course I remain super excited about it. But DEPIN in particular, I would say, is especially just case by case. It's one of those things where I'm always excited about the ambition, and then I always want to figure out, have you thought about these two, the monitoring and capital cost thing, especially well?
Sweet.
It's for something like very practical and like what I want to see more of. I mean, I want to see more people exploring the mobile space. I mean, I think that although that sort of talks against my own book, I guess, in some way, like I think it's important to have more experimentation, more competition, new ideas of how to deploy these kinds of networks outside of the existing ones in mobile. And there's some hype around energy right now, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity in manufacturing. When I build hardware, for example, it takes such a long time to get like a prototype in my hands that I can play with. It would be really, really great if there were many companies like 3DOS is a good example of this, that are building, that you can just sort of like write a little like thing in AutoCAD and make a little spec and send it over, and the next morning you have the prototype in your hands. Like that, these kinds of things. And I think that could be applied to other use cases as well, not just for physical things, but also for in the biomedical sciences space and more. So I'd love to see things like that in DEPIN.
Amazing. I think we're at time. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you, Shayon.
Yeah.
Great monitoring. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Shayon.